October 27, 1989. A young girl receives a phone call at her home in Bay Village, Ohio. The caller claims to know her mother, says he has information about a promotion her mother is supposedly receiving at work, wants to take the girl shopping to pick out a gift for her mother. The call is brief. The voice is male, adult, calm, persuasive. The girl agrees to meet him. That same day, she disappears. Last seen leaving a shopping plaza with an unidentified man. Her body is discovered months later in a rural area. The case becomes one of the most haunting unsolved abductions in Ohio history. And that phone call, that voice on the line that convinced her to meet a stranger, was never identified. Not in 1989. Not with the technology that existed then. But here's what makes this case different from other cold cases. That voice was recorded. Multiple phone calls between the suspect and the victim were documented on answering machine tapes. The family saved those recordings, preserved them. For over 35 years, those tapes have existed. Those recordings captured the actual voice of whoever was responsible, the exact speech patterns, the specific vocal characteristics, the unique acoustic fingerprint of the person who made those calls. In 1989, investigators listened to those recordings, played them for witnesses, asked if anyone recognized the voice, used human perception to try to identify who was speaking, but human voice recognition has severe limitations. We can recognize voices we know well, family, friends, close associates. But matching an unknown voice to a person, especially without seeing them speak, is extraordinarily difficult for human perception. The recordings were evidence, but they couldn't tell investigators who was speaking, not with 1989 technology. Right now, more than 35 years after those phone calls were recorded, voice analysis AI exists that can do what human perception cannot, can analyze vocal characteristics at a level of detail impossible for human hearing, can extract acoustic features that uniquely identify individual speakers, can compare voice recordings against databases of known voices, can potentially match that 1989 recording to a person even if that person has never been a suspect, even if they've never been questioned, even if no human investigator ever made the connection. That technology has never been applied to the phone call recordings from this case. Recordings that have existed for over 35 years. Recordings that captured the voice of whoever was responsible. Recordings that modern voice analysis AI might finally be able to match to an identity. This case went cold more than 3 decades ago, but the voice is preserved. The recordings are intact. And the technology that might finally identify who was speaking exists now, and it's time for someone to use it. Before we go any further, I need to know something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Are you in Ohio? Somewhere else in the United States? Somewhere else entirely? I want to see how many people still remember what happened in Bay Village in 1989. And if you believe that every piece of evidence in cold cases deserves modern analysis, that voice recordings from 35 years ago should be subjected to AI technology that didn't exist when they were captured, that families who have waited over 3 decades for answers deserve every possible scientific effort. Subscribe to Cold Case right now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and smash that like button because it pushes this story to more people who need to hear it. We specialize in cases where evidence exists but couldn't be fully analyzed when it was collected. We follow technological breakthroughs that are finally extracting information from evidence that's been waiting decades. This case has voice recordings from 1989 that were heard by human ears but never analyzed by AI. Modern voice analysis technology might change everything, and the difference between what human listening could do in 1989 and what AI analysis can do in 2025 is staggering. Now let's dive into what those recordings contain, what happened to them in 1989, why human analysis wasn't enough, and what voice analysis AI can do with them now. Understanding what happened requires understanding the timeline. In the months leading up to the abduction, phone calls were received at the family home. Calls from an adult male. Calls that seemed to be grooming, establishing familiarity, building trust. The caller knew details about the family, knew the mother's workplace, knew enough to make the calls seem legitimate. Some of these calls were captured on the home answering machine. The tapes recorded the voice, preserved the audio. After the abduction, investigators obtained those answering machine tapes. They had actual voice recordings of the suspect. This was significant. Most abduction cases don't have recordings of the perpetrator's voice. This case did. Investigators could listen to exactly what was said, could hear precisely how it was said, could analyze the voice itself. The recordings were evidence, physical evidence in audio form. Evidence that potentially contained identifying information. In 1989, voice analysis was primitive compared to what exists today. Investigators played the recordings, listened carefully, tried to identify accent patterns, regional speech characteristics, age indicators in the voice, educational background suggested by vocabulary and speech patterns. They played the recordings for witnesses, for people who knew potential suspects, asked if anyone recognized the voice. This was standard procedure. This was the best available method for voice analysis in 1989. But human voice recognition has fundamental limitations. Research has shown that even people who think they're good at recognizing voices make mistakes. Voice identification by human listeners is unreliable unless the listener knows the speaker very well. Studies show accuracy rates for unknown voice identification by humans are barely above chance. We think we can recognize voices, but when tested scientifically, human voice recognition for unknown speakers is remarkably poor. The recordings from this case were played for numerous people. No definitive identification was made. No one could say with certainty who was speaking. The voice remained unidentified. The recordings were evidence, but they couldn't solve the case. Not with human listening, not with 1989 technology. The tapes were preserved, kept in evidence, saved for potential future analysis. But in 1989, future analysis meant hoping that someday, somehow, technology would exist that could do more than human ears could do. That someday has arrived. Voice analysis AI in 2025 can analyze speech in ways that would have seemed impossible 35 years ago. And this isn't experimental technology. It's proven, used by law enforcement, accepted by courts, applied successfully to numerous cases where voice recordings needed to be analyzed or compared. Quick question before we continue. What time is it where you are right now? Let us know in the comments. I'm curious how many of you are watching this, thinking about how voice recordings from 35 years ago might finally reveal who made those phone calls when modern AI is applied to them. Let me break down what voice analysis AI can do and why it matters for this case. Human listeners hear voices holistically. We perceive a voice as a unified sound. We might notice it's high or low-pitched, male or female, young or old. But we can't consciously process the hundreds of acoustic features that make each voice unique. Those features exist. They're in the audio. But human perception can't separate and measure them. We hear the voice. We don't analyze it at the level of detail needed for reliable identification. Voice analysis AI does exactly that. It analyzes voices at an acoustic feature level that human perception cannot access. It measures fundamental frequency, the pitch of the voice, formant frequencies, the resonances that characterize vowel sounds and are determined by individual vocal tract anatomy, speaking rate, pause patterns, rhythm, intonation contours, consonant articulation characteristics. All of these acoustic features are extracted from the audio and converted into mathematical representations. The AI creates what's called a voice print, not a metaphor, an actual mathematical model of the unique acoustic characteristics of a specific speaker's voice. Just like fingerprints are unique to individuals, voice prints derived from detailed acoustic analysis are highly distinctive. Two people might sound similar to human ears, but their voice prints, when analyzed with sufficient detail, will show measurable differences. This technology has multiple capabilities relevant to this case. First, speaker verification. If investigators have a suspect, If they can obtain a voice sample from that suspect, AI can compare that sample to the 1989 recordings, can determine with high statistical confidence whether the same person is speaking in both recordings. This is far more reliable than human listeners saying, yes, that sounds like the same person. AI measures dozens of acoustic features and quantifies the similarity, produces probability scores, provides scientific analysis rather than subjective perception. Second, speaker identification from databases. Some voice analysis systems can compare a recording against databases of known voices. If the suspect's voice happens to be in any accessible database, if they've been recorded in any context that's digitally available, AI might be able to make a match. This is more speculative, depends on what voice databases exist and can be accessed, but it's possible, and it's something that couldn't be done in 1989. Third, voice characteristic analysis for investigative leads. Even if AI can't match the voice to a specific person, it can extract information about the speaker that narrows down who they might be. Age estimation, based on acoustic features that correlate with aging of the vocal apparatus. Geographic origin estimation based on accent and pronunciation patterns. Educational background suggested by vocabulary and speech complexity. Emotional state during the recording based on stress indicators in the voice. All of this creates an investigative profile, not identification, but information that can guide investigation. Fourth, enhancement and separation for better analysis. If the recordings are degraded, if there's background noise, if audio quality is poor, AI can often enhance the speech signal, can separate the voice from background sounds, can improve the clarity of the recording so that more detailed analysis is possible. This might reveal speech characteristics that weren't clearly audible in the original recordings even to trained human listeners. Fifth, comparison with other recordings for pattern matching. If investigators have recordings of potential suspects, even recordings made decades after 1989, AI can compare them to the original recordings, accounting for age-related changes in voice. Human voices do change with age, but the underlying anatomical and learned characteristics remain largely stable. AI can model age-related voice changes and determine whether two recordings separated by decades could be the same speaker at different ages. The recordings from this case contain multiple utterances. The suspect spoke for extended periods during the phone calls, said enough that substantial acoustic data exists. This is crucial. Voice analysis AI needs sufficient speech samples to extract reliable features. Short utterances, just a word or two, provide limited data. But extended speech, full sentences, conversational exchanges, these provide rich acoustic information. The recordings from this case contain exactly that kind of extended speech. Here's what's particularly significant. The recordings are over 35 years old, but audio degradation from age primarily affects the storage medium, not the fundamental acoustic characteristics of the speech. If the tapes were properly stored, if they were digitized before significant degradation occurred, the voice characteristics are still there, still analyzable. The acoustic features that make the speaker's voice unique haven't disappeared. Just because the recordings are old, they're preserved in the audio, waiting for analysis technology that can extract them. If you're finding this valuable, if you're learning things about voice analysis AI that you didn't know before, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube's algorithm that this story matters, that people still care about what happened over 35 years ago, that cold cases deserve modern technology. Your engagement helps us bring attention to cases where evidence exists but has never been analyzed with the best available science. So like, comment, share. Now let's talk about what specifically would be involved in applying voice analysis AI to the recordings from this case. First, the original recordings need to be located and assessed. They should be in evidence storage, hopefully properly preserved, hopefully digitized at some point to prevent degradation of the original tapes. The quality of the recordings needs to be evaluated. How clear is the speech? How much background noise? What's the signal-to-noise ratio? All of this determines what kind of analysis is possible. Second, If the recordings haven't been digitized or if early digitization used poor quality methods, modern high-quality digitization should be performed. This captures as much acoustic information as possible from the original tapes. Modern digitization methods preserve more detail than older methods. If the recordings were digitized in the 1990s or early 2000s, redigitization with current technology might extract additional information. Third, audio enhancement and pre-processing. Using AI-based audio enhancement to improve speech clarity, remove or reduce background noise, enhance the voice signal, compensate for degradation. This step prepares the recordings for detailed voice analysis. The goal is to get the clearest possible representation of the speaker's voice from the available audio. Fourth, acoustic feature extraction. The AI analyzes the enhanced audio and extracts hundreds of acoustic features. Fundamental frequency patterns, formant frequencies across different vowels, speaking rate, rhythm, intonation, consonant characteristics, all converted into mathematical representations that characterize this specific speaker's voice. Fifth, voice print generation. Those acoustic features are used to create a comprehensive voice print, a mathematical model that represents the unique characteristics of this speaker's voice. This voice print can then be compared to other voice samples or used for speaker characteristics analysis. Sixth, comparison and analysis. If investigators have suspects, if voice samples from those suspects exist, the voice print from the 1989 recordings is compared to voice prints from the suspect samples. The AI calculates similarity scores, determines the probability that the same person is speaking in both recordings, provides statistical confidence measures. This is far more reliable than human listeners making subjective judgments about voice similarity. If no specific suspects exist, the voice print might be compared against available voice databases to look for matches. The voice characteristics might be analyzed to provide investigative leads. Age estimation, accent analysis, educational background indicators. Any information that helps narrow down who the speaker might be. The entire process takes weeks to months, requires specialized voice analysis software, requires expertise in acoustic phonetics and forensic voice analysis, requires resources. But for a case that's been cold for over 35 years, for a family that's waited over 3 decades for answers, for a case where the suspect's actual voice is recorded and preserved, those resources are entirely justified. Let's talk about the challenges and limitations. Voice analysis AI is powerful but not magic. It has limitations that need to be understood. First, recording quality matters enormously. If the recordings are severely degraded, if the speech is barely audible, if background noise overwhelms the voice signal, even the best AI might not be able to extract reliable acoustic features. The success of voice analysis depends fundamentally on audio quality. The recordings from this case are over 35 years old. Degradation is possible, but answering machine recordings from 1989 were analog magnetic tape. If stored properly, if not subjected to heat or magnetic fields, the recordings could be quite well preserved. Second, voice analysis AI is probabilistic, not absolute. It produces similarity scores, probability measures, statistical confidence levels. It doesn't produce absolute yes or no identifications except in cases where the match is extremely strong. This is actually a strength from a scientific perspective. It's honest about uncertainty, but it means results need to be interpreted carefully by experts. A high similarity score is strong evidence, but it's not necessarily enough for courtroom identification without supporting evidence. Third, voice databases for comparison might be limited. If the technology can't identify the speaker from available databases, if the suspect's voice isn't recorded anywhere that's accessible, then voice print comparison won't produce a match. This doesn't mean the analysis is useless. It still produces speaker characteristics that provide investigative leads. But it means direct identification from database matching might not be possible. Fourth, age-related voice changes complicate comparison. The recordings are from 1989. If the suspect is still alive and available for voice sampling, they're 35 years older than when the original recordings were made. Voices change with age. Vocal folds thicken or thin. Speaking patterns evolve. AI can model these changes, can account for expected age-related modifications. But there's always some uncertainty when comparing recordings separated by decades. These challenges are real. They don't mean voice analysis AI can't help. They mean it needs to be applied carefully by experts who understand the technology's capabilities and limitations. But even with these challenges, voice analysis AI in 2025 can do things that were completely impossible in 1989. Can extract information from those recordings that no human listener could extract. Can potentially identify who was speaking, or at minimum provide investigative leads that didn't exist for 35 years. Before we wrap up, I want to know something. Have you been following other cold cases where audio recordings exist but haven't been analyzed with modern AI? Drop the case names in the comments. What unsolved cases are on your radar? What cold cases do you think deserve modern voice analysis? Now let's talk about why this matters beyond just this one case. This case represents a category of cold cases where audio evidence exists but has never been subjected to modern AI analysis. Phone recordings, 911 calls, recorded threats, ransom demands. Any case where the perpetrator's voice was recorded but never identified. Many of these cases went cold before voice analysis AI existed. The recordings were preserved, but the technology to fully analyze them wasn't available. Voice analysis AI changes that. Previously, unidentified voice recordings were limited to human listening. Play the recordings for people. Ask if anyone recognizes the voice. Hope for a lucky break. Now those same recordings can be subjected to detailed acoustic analysis, can be compared against available voice samples, can be analyzed for speaker characteristics, can potentially lead to identification or at minimum provide investigative direction. The technology exists, has been validated, has been used successfully in criminal investigations. But it hasn't been applied to the vast majority of cold cases where voice recordings exist. Evidence sits in storage. Recordings sit unanalyzed. The connection between old audio evidence and new AI capabilities often isn't made. Someone has to make it. Someone has to look at 35-year-old recordings and say, these should be analyzed with modern AI. This might finally tell us who was speaking. For this case, that hasn't happened yet. The recordings from 1989 sit in evidence, listened to by human ears for over 3 decades. Never analyzed by AI. The technology that might finally identify the voice has existed for years, but no one has applied it to this case. That needs to change. If you haven't subscribed to Cold Case yet, do it now. We follow cases where modern AI technology is finally being applied to decades-old evidence. When voice analysis identifies a speaker from 35-year-old recordings, when audio that human listeners couldn't identify is finally matched to a person, when technology catches up to evidence that's been waiting, you need to know. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Stay with us. The path from cold case evidence to AI analysis isn't automatic. It requires human decision and initiative. Cold case detectives need to be aware that voice analysis AI exists and can be applied to old recordings. They need to prioritize cases where voice evidence exists. They need to allocate resources, obtain the original recordings, commission analysis from qualified forensic voice analysis experts. Each step requires someone making a decision and taking action. For this case, multiple factors make voice analysis particularly promising. First, the recordings definitively capture the suspect's voice. There's no question that the person speaking is involved. The recordings document the grooming process, the calls that led to the abduction. This isn't a recording where someone might or might not be involved. The person speaking on these recordings is absolutely connected to the case. Second, the recordings contain extended speech, multiple utterances, conversational exchanges. This provides substantial acoustic data for analysis. Short recordings with minimal speech are harder to analyze, but these recordings contain enough speech that detailed voice print extraction should be possible. Third, The case has maintained public attention, has remained in public consciousness. This creates pressure and motivation for new analysis. Cases that are completely forgotten often don't get re-examined even when new technology becomes available. But cases that maintain visibility, that families keep advocating for, that communities remember, these are more likely to receive new analysis. Fourth, the suspect might still be alive, might still be accessible for voice sampling if identified through other means, might have recorded speech available from other sources. If voice analysis identifies the speaker or provides strong leads, follow-up investigation is possible in ways that wouldn't be if decades had erased all traces. The convergence of preserved recordings, modern AI capability, public attention, and potential for follow-up creates an opportunity. An opportunity to apply 35 years of technological advancement to evidence that's been waiting. An opportunity to extract information from those recordings that human listening never could. An opportunity to potentially identify who made those phone calls. Who groomed a young girl over the telephone. Who convinced her to meet a stranger. Who was responsible for what happened. If you haven't subscribed to Cold Case yet, what are you waiting for? We cover cases just like this one. Cases where audio evidence from decades ago is finally being analyzed with AI that didn't exist when the recordings were made. Cases where voices that went unidentified for years are finally being matched to speakers. And you don't want to miss what happens when recordings from 1989 are finally analyzed with 2025 technology. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications. The technology is proven. The recordings exist. Everything needed to potentially identify the voice is available. What's needed now is for someone to make it happen. And when they do, when the results come in, Cold Case will be here to cover every development. We've covered substantial ground, over 35 years of waiting. Voice recordings from 1989 that captured the suspect, but couldn't identify them with available technology. Human listening that tried, but couldn't make a definitive identification. Voice analysis AI that can analyze speech at a level of acoustic detail impossible for human perception. Technology that can extract voice prints, compare recordings, identify speaker characteristics. Technology that might finally reveal who was speaking in those phone calls more than 3 decades ago. This case represents both the limitation of past technology and the promise of current technology. In 1989, preserving the voice recordings was the best investigators could do. They listened. They tried to identify the speaker. But human perception wasn't enough. The case went cold. The recordings were saved, preserved for a future when technology might exist that could do more. That future is now. Voice analysis AI in 2025 can analyze those recordings in ways that weren't possible in 1989. Can extract acoustic features, can generate voice prints, can compare voices, can identify speaker characteristics, can potentially determine who was speaking. The recordings have been waiting for 35 years, waiting for technology that could read them, that could analyze them, that could extract the identifying information they contain. She was a young girl who received phone calls that seemed innocent, but weren't, who was groomed by someone who knew how to build trust, who was convinced to meet a stranger because the caller seemed legitimate, who disappeared and never came home. She deserved to be safe. She deserved to grow up. She deserved a life that wasn't stolen from her. She deserved justice that didn't take 35 years to potentially arrive. Her family has lived with this for over 3 decades, has carried the weight of knowing that the person responsible called their home, that his voice is recorded, that somewhere that voice might match a person if only the technology existed to make the connection. They've waited for technology to advance, waited for someone to apply modern analysis to old recordings, waited for the voice that took their daughter to finally be identified. But the story isn't over. After more than 35 years, those recordings might finally yield identification. The voice that was captured in 1989, preserved on answering machine tapes, listened to by investigators but never analyzed by AI, might finally be matched to a person. The acoustic characteristics that make that voice unique, that have been in those recordings all along might finally be extracted and compared, might finally lead to identification, might finally bring answers that human listening never could. She can't be brought back. That's the tragedy no technology can change. And we can't give her family back the 35 years they spent waiting. But we can ensure those voice recordings are analyzed with the best available technology. We can ensure that voice analysis AI is applied to audio that's been waiting over 3 decades. We can ensure that if the identifying information is in those recordings, modern technology extracts it. We can ensure her story is remembered, her case is pursued, and the voice that took her is finally identified. This case went cold for 35 years. The voice was recorded, the evidence existed, but the technology to analyze it properly didn't. Not in 1989. That technology exists now. Voice analysis AI can identify speakers from audio recordings, can analyze voices at acoustic levels human perception cannot access, can potentially determine who made those phone calls, who groomed a young girl, who was responsible. The technology caught up, the recordings survived, and now there's a path forward that didn't exist for 35 years. A path that starts with applying modern voice analysis AI to recordings that have been waiting for exactly this technology, waiting for exactly this moment. Rest in peace. After more than 35 years, the technology that might finally identify the voice on those recordings exists, and it's time for someone to use it. If this case moved you, if you want to see modern AI applied to voice recordings that have been unidentified for 35 years, if you believe that evidence should be analyzed with the best available technology regardless of how old it is, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Cold Case. We're tracking developments in voice analysis AI and its application to cold cases. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you think voice recordings from decades ago should be analyzed with modern AI? Do you follow other cases where audio evidence might finally be identifiable? What cold cases do you think deserve this technology? And share this video with anyone who follows cold cases, anyone who believes old evidence deserves new technology, anyone who wants to see voices that went unidentified for decades finally matched to their speakers. The voice has been recorded for 35 years. Technology that can analyze it exists. The connection just needs to be made. And when it is, the identification that eluded human listeners for over 3 decades might finally emerge. The voice might finally have a name. And justice that seemed impossible for 35 years might finally be possible. Technology didn't exist in 1989 to identify that voice. It exists now, and it's time to use it.